Hi guys, Dan Bradbury here, and in today's interview, I'll introduce Mr. Alastair Broom, who we're going to talk about his business, GarageFlex, specifically his journey about how he started the business, how he scaled it, and more importantly, how he exited. There's a lot of lessons in here, both good and bad, things to learn, things that can help you on your journey to exit. So with that said, Alastair, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan. Good to see you.
So good to see you too. And it's been many years, because I'll say for context, you exited GarageFlex back in, I believe it was 2021. Is that right?
Yeah, December the 2021.
Yeah, there you go. It was a good New Year's present or New Year's transition. So I suppose for those that don't know, I do want to get into the kind of the exact levers you pulled, how you overcame the classic bottlenecks that most business owners face, and what it felt like to let go of the business. And plus, selfishly, I want to ask a few questions about how our work together played a part in the journey. But most importantly, let's give the listeners something to get the teeth into. So take us back to the start. What led you to start GarageFlex in the first place?
Well, I spent most of my working life in property of some sort. I was an estate agent for 25 years. I refurbished a couple of houses. And then I was sitting down one day at home and we were going through what shall I do for the next and last phase of my working life. And I wanted to do something in property. We actually had a sort of a fairly intelligent conversation, my wife and a couple of ladies that worked for her in her soft furnishing business, and we went through property. We went through the whole gamut of what's been done and what hasn't been done. And I said, my biggest frustration in my house is my garage. I had a nice house, double garage, absolute mess, and I couldn't do anything with it. So I started looking online to see if I could buy something to do the floor, just tidy it up. I couldn't. One day I was looking online for business opportunities for the next 10 years, and I came across an American website that said it's for baby boomers, it's for people in the retirement industry, care homes, and garage improvements. So big ding ding went. I looked online and I found a company in America. So I sent them an email, asked them if I could buy some of their product. I didn't hear from them. Emailed them again, didn't hear from them, rang them up. Oh, we only supply to our distributors. Can I be your distributor in the UK? Well, I don't know. We haven't thought about that. So I flew over and saw them 2 days later, had a meeting with them. As soon as I walked into their office, it was a wow moment because there was a double garage all fitted out. After about 3 months of negotiations, I became the UK distributor for a company called Garage Tech, who are based on Long Island. And I was their distributor for 10 years. My accountant, who is a very good friend, said, why on earth are you doing that? Don't sign up for 10 years with an American company. But I did, and we started it. And it was quite a high-cost startup because I had to pay them a fee and I had to get quite a lot of stock. But within a few days of starting to actually talk to people, it became really exciting. People saw the opportunity. So I started in December 2005 as the UK distributor for an American company.
Interesting. And just to really put the meat on the bones for those listening, so what did the company do? You transformed garage spaces. How would you articulate it? What, I suppose, was the elevator pitch to potential customers?
Yes. So we were the interior designers of garages, residential garages in private homes. So we had a system that we developed that fitted out the garage with a wall cladding that was a bit like a shop fitting system. So once you clad the walls, then you can hang racks to keep anything, golf clubs, tennis racks, bike racks, Waitrose shop, whatever you wanted. So we clad all the walls, we clad the ceiling, we put a decent floor down, and eventually we developed other options so that you could do the garage doors, you could do heating, lighting, anything. So we designed and installed garage interiors primarily for people who were cash rich, time poor, because it was quite an expensive niche product, but it became the installation system for UK garages.
Yeah, I love it. In fact, for full disclosure, even though, there's no vested interest because you've sold the business, but behind this wall, I have a couple of garages with my property behind this wall. I'm happy to say I was a paying GarageFlex customer and got a phenomenal home gym setup, which I still use on an almost daily basis.
Well, I can't tell you, the thrill of me getting you to sign up for me to do your garage was one of my career highlights.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment, even though I know you've got a few celebrity clients, and maybe if you're allowed to name drop, I don't know. I think they might be under NDAs, but you've had some, everybody would know their name type customers as clients, haven't you?
Yeah, we did have. I mean, at one stage we were going through the Premier League with a number of international and national footballers, and then we did a few show business people. Yeah, it was great. I mean, what I actually loved, because having been in an estate agency and we dealt with the top end of the housing market, I was going into similar houses, very top end houses, meeting really nice people and giving them a product that they didn't know existed, but gave them massive satisfaction because
Right.
they suddenly saw the value in it. Having said that, I ought to say we also dealt right down through the whole housing sector. So one day I was going into an ex-council house, next day I was going into a Wentworth estate. So it was wonderful, wonderful business.
Yeah, it was interesting for me because again, I get that as in terms of the monetary spend. Well, actually, I know, but the listeners don't necessarily. What was the kind of ballpark range, kind of the price point? Where did the bulk of the orders fall between? So for you to put in this system in the garage, obviously it depends on the spec, but what was a typical price point or range of price points that the majority of orders fell?
Yeah, I guess over time we actually developed a very flexible system. So if somebody really just wanted a floor put down in a double garage that would cost them maybe £2,000, if they wanted the whole system done, bear in mind I sold 3 years ago. At that stage, we were talking about top end single garage, £8,000 to £10,000, double 12 to 14, triple 14 to 18.
Yeah, and I mean, I also get how spending, so I don't want to be dismissive of people that this is a lot of money, but the listeners to this are mostly, like yourself, also well-heeled business owners sending single-digit thousands of pounds, but they feel like they've just had an extension because they've taken this unusable space and transformed it into a beautiful either home office or just glorious storage, or in my case, a gym or a fitness room, etc. So it's in terms of the psychological return on investment, right? Let alone, I suppose, the perception as to or what value it did add to the properties. But that's another route. But I get the appeal for people going, you've got this dead space.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and one of the driving factors that I used to say to people: why have you got £500 worth of junk on the floor in your garage and £100,000 worth of cars sitting outside?
Right.
Just didn't make sense. And
So,
and the Daily Telegraph in the very early days did a review on us, and they did a really nice article on added value factors. And they had done conservatories, swimming pools, etc., and they said that ours was one of the top return on investment for spending money, because you are suddenly reclaiming, well, if it's 150 square foot up to 600 square foot, you're reclaiming that as valuable house.
so what were the key inflection points in scaling the business? Was it a new hire, a strategic change, a kind of a mind shift? What were the various key points along the way?
Well, I suppose in the early days it was a very new niche market, so we had to do some quite sort of savvy marketing to make sure we got through to the right people. And luckily, because of my agency background, I knew quite a lot of top end estate agents and quite a lot of the sort of the homeowners in the area. So we would bombard those with mail shots. Once we'd actually got a good core number of single, double, triple garages, we started putting those out into newsletters, and we just built it basically on people getting to know us and referring their friends. We came up with all sorts of ideas of, we'll give you a free dinner at the waterside if you sign up or if you refer a friend or whatever. But most of our clients were saying, don't give me any of that incentive. If I've got a good product, I'd tell my friends.
Right.
And so it was referrals. We got a lot of referrals. Probably the big key area, though, was we started by making it very flexible. So people would see a picture, say, that's what I love. Can you come and see me? We would always have a chat before we went, so they had an expectation before we went to see them. But when I got there, sometimes they would say, it's just too expensive. I'm sorry, I love the look of it. So we would say, well, just don't do it all. Just do half your garage. Do what's the key thing. So we broke it down so that it was flexible. But then the big key shift came a few years later when we realized the value of gyms in houses. And I'll come on to that shortly, but that was a big shift.
How did the business model evolve? What did you learn about the customers, or was it a system-based thing? Talk us through that kind of transition in the journey. And then, by the way, that could be in terms of externally with the customers, but also I'm interested in the transition around leadership, going from you going out, quoting, closing the sale, to ultimately building a team of people and building a business that didn't require you to operate?
Yeah, so it started off with me in my study at home with my wife, who'd stopped her soft furnishing business, and she was the bookkeeper. So it was the two of us. And then we got in fact, Barbara's sister joined us, and she would sort of man the phones and help out. So probably for the first couple of years, and the first 6 garages I installed with a friend of mine who was a very good DIY guy. So we really were doing the whole thing.
Bootstrapping at its finest.
Yeah, it was great fun. And I mean, I can remember working till 10 o'clock on something like December the 21st, because we promised this gentleman it would be finished before Christmas. We were working till 10 o'clock at night in Oxford to get it done. So we put a lot into it. And the big shift was actually over the next sort of 2 years, the volume began to build up. And I recruited installers who we paid as subcontractors. So when we had jobs, but we gave them permanent work. And then we ended up with 3 teams on the road. But to get there, what we had to do, I fitted out a garage in Barnes in London for a very nice young South African couple, who then went back to South Africa and started up GarageFlex or Garage Tech, as it was then, in South Africa. But if they only stayed there a couple of years, and then they came back to the UK, and the lady rang me and said, are you looking for a salesperson? I love the business. We had our own garage done. We started in South Africa. So she joined it. She joined me straight away as a commissioned salesperson and was red hot. So between the two of us, we started, and that pretty well doubled the turnover, because she was very good at selling. I was pretty okay. And we found we were covering a lot of the country. And in fact, the challenge we had was, because we social media was just beginning to come in there, strange enough. So we were putting it out on a little bit of social media, but lots of magazines. And we got calls from people all over the country. Well, at that stage, if they were prepared to pay, I was prepared to travel. So we went all over the place, and we put our fitters up in Premier Inns. We had all the stock. So it actually grew pretty quickly at that stage. But then I started in 2005. 2008 was my next challenge, because the financial crash came.
Yeah.
And we were badly hit, because we were a niche, we were quite expensive, and people just decided they didn't want to do that. So we didn't lay anybody off, but we cut right back and kept it pretty slim. There was only one time where I thought seriously that we're going to have a bit of a challenge here. But that's when I heard about the world of mentoring. And I was introduced to a gentleman in Oxford who, I won't say he's one of your competitors, because he still does coaching, but I signed up with him. And he was very good at marketing. And so we began to sort of do a lot more referrals, and through his networking group, we managed to keep ticking by. Then as 2009 came about, and 2010, so we began to build up the business again. And it was going along quite nicely. I got a 3rd salesperson in, I got a 3rd installation team in, and we were doing pretty well when my 10 years came up with America. 2015. So I told them I didn't want to renew. We had a bit of a disagreement about the whole thing, because they wanted me to stay on. Because I should say, by that time, I'd introduced them to people in South Africa, Australia, and Russia, who all became international distributors. And they were all people I knew. I'd introduced them. So we had a nice little network of international distributors. But America just didn't cope very well with the 2008, 2009 recession. And their business was changing enormously, and they weren't able to give me any support. So I broke away from them and rebranded as GarageFlex and sourced all my own product. And that's when the big shift came. By doing that, I had the freedom to do what I wanted, how I wanted, with my own website. And we began to motor on quite nicely, or I thought quite nicely, until I was introduced to a guy called Dan Bradbury. And then I met you. I came to one of your finance days, and you spent the whole day talking about P&Ls and the value of understanding P&Ls and balance sheets. And I'd had a pretty good understanding of it. In fact, when I first left school and had no idea what I wanted to do, I worked for 6 months in the accounts office for Saab UK. They were clients of my father, who was an accountant, and that 6 months told me all about bank reconciliations, double entry bookkeeping, etc. So I was okay. But I realized that, sort of percentage-wise, my margins weren't as good as they should be. And I joined up with you, and I think that's probably when things began to improve from a finance point of view.
So to whatever degree you're comfortable, Alistair, what was whether there's revenues or team size or whatever, or what were the margins percentage wise, and how much, and then did they increase over time? What, in other words, what's good or bad? Could you give us some kind of calibration for that?
Well, yeah, I'll try and remember, but I think I probably joined you in something like 2017, probably, was it? So about 8 years ago, 9 years ago. I'm in my mid-70s now, so my memory of those numbers is beginning to wane a bit. But I do remember when we went through to look at what my gross margin was. We reckon we could probably squeeze another 10% out of that. When I was looking at my net margin, we reckon we could squeeze another few percent out of that as well. And so there were two or three things that I started to do. One was look at all my costs even more diligently. But the other, and I think a lot of small business owners have this challenge, I wrote down all the chores that had to be done in the business, and I put the names against all of them. And it was a real eureka moment because I realized I did everything.
Yes.
And therefore I didn't have time to specialize in what was my strength. And so I had recruited, believe it or not, just a little amusing sideline. I was looking for a warehouse boy, oblique trainee carpenter. And I put an advert in, and at that stage, you were getting all sorts of sort of people that didn't speak a lot of English. And I was thinking, I'm not going to find anybody here. And we were sitting in the office one day, and this gentleman came in a suit, and he said to the lady on reception, I've come about the job vacancy. And she sort of steered to me, and I said, hello, how can I help you? Yes, I've come about the job vacancy. I said, oh gosh, you got me there. I don't know a job vacancy. He said, well, it's here in the Henley Standard. I said, well, that's for a junior tradesman, oblique warehouse boy. He said, that's what I've come to interview for. And I looked at him. I said, I beg your pardon. And he, at that stage, was 2 years older than me. Well, he still is. Cut a long story short, I took him on, and he started doing a bit of work out with my fitters. And after about 6 months, I had this list together, and I realized I was doing everything. So I said to Bill, look, Bill, you're getting on really well as a trainee carpenter and warehouse boy, but why don't you come inside and help run all my stock and all my purchasing, all that side of it? So he was dead chuffed. I mean, he'd been a marketing executive all his life, and he just fancied he didn't want to sit at home. So he came inside and he did it. He took all that side off me, which meant I could focus on selling, strategic development, see what I'm going to do with the business. And that was a big, big shift for me, because I was probably going to crack up if I'd carried on as it was.
And what year was this? Put us in the timeline.
This would have been about 2018, 19.
Well, and it's interesting, when we start working in the boardroom together, the first quarter, I've got your financials and your numbers, and then literally a quarter later, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying this is me, I'm just saying you were obviously on that transition and the changes were happening. A quarter later, my first line was best quarter ever, right? And yeah, so a shift started to happen. But at what point, Alastair, did you start thinking about, when did selling the business become a serious consideration?
It had been a consideration around that time, because I was approaching 70, and although I loved it, I kind of, there's so many other things I do in life. I wanted to spend a bit of time enjoying it. So it was around that time I thought that I really need to focus on that. And I had already had conversations with a couple of people in related industries, home improvement industries, just to see if they were looking to expand. And as I say, I got close to it with one person, and then I kind of kept that on the burner. But then I think it's fair to say I met somebody through your organization, and we started talking, not about selling, but just, over coffee. How's your business doing? How's mine? I'm sure you can do a bit better if you sort of did this and this. And it was quite clear that there was a potential purchaser in the room, not my boardroom group with your organization, but one of the other boardroom groups.
Somebody else, again, in the same broad sense, in terms of home improvement, they were scaling, and they were looking for growth. And like you said, as you said, identified earlier on, this was a perfect bolt-on acquisition for somebody in the same space because of cross-sell opportunities, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seemed a perfect fit. They very successful, very aggressive. So that seemed a perfect fit. Then probably the big shift came with COVID. And this is a really difficult one for me to get my head around, because I lost 3 very good friends in COVID, including my accountant. See, I still get emotional about it. And probably we could see lockdown coming. We actually closed our office about 2 weeks before national lockdown. And I thought, how are we going to get through this? But we decided we were going to be working from home. The contractors decided they could go out and still install. And so we developed what we called a VDP, virtual design presentation. Rather than going out to see people, which we clearly couldn't, we started asking people to send us pictures and dimensions of their garage. We would quote, they would accept, we would go and install. And that cut down an awful lot of traveling, an awful lot of time. So automatically our margins improved. But then suddenly gyms locked down. And that was the big shift. The gymnasiums locked down. So many people wanted to convert their garage into a gym that we pushed that one pretty hard. And I found somebody who did installations. So we signed up with him that he would put all the equipment in and we'd get a cut of it. And business just took off.
It's funny, 9th of June 2020, a meeting we had then,
Yep.
And it says highest number of leads ever. And so it was like, yeah, it was already taking off. Interesting.
Yeah.
Also about that time, I won't say the number out of respect for you and for the purchaser, but you said to me in that meeting, I want to get X pounds for an exit. And not to give too much away, but I'll just say, I'm pleasantly surprised because I'd forgotten about that note, because the number that was achieved was actually higher than that number that you stated in June of that date.
Well, I could see by June. I mean, that was only 3 months into lockdown. We carried on our marketing. We carried on talking to people. I'm at home now. My desk is still there. I sat there from 8 in the morning till 8 at night, fielding phone calls, making VDPs, and we worked our socks off. But it paid itself. 2020 was a very good year for us. It carried on into 2021. And probably to answer your question, what was the trigger point that made me want to sell? I'll never forget this. We went to France in September. I mentioned that my best friend died of COVID. I saw him the day before we went. And when I came back, he had COVID and he died a week later. And another very good friend of mine, I mean, we both used to play pretty serious squash together about 50 years ago. Another friend of mine had a heart attack. He died the same week. And I thought, life's too short. I've got to do it now. So that was August, September 2021. I think I mentioned to you earlier that the person within your organization who'd always shown an interest, I rang him up and I said, I've just come back from holiday. I've lost 2 of my closest friends. I'm prepared to sell now. This is the price I want if it can be completed by the 31st of December. And that's what we did. So we sold and we completed in 3 months.
Amazing. Hence the 31st December deadline. So he honored, you set a deadline and he honored it and it was completed.
Yep.
There's a few late hours and a few legal bills for running that Christmas to New Year jaunt. But I suppose without going into specifics that would upset the new owners or contractual obligations, of course, can you say anything about the structure? Because I suppose people often ask, or people have an expectation, which I think is false. People who haven't sold before in the SME market, they think that it's going to be all cash up front, day one, that's it. I'm going to walk away instantaneously with a big pile of cash and never see again. Whilst I believe, obviously, you did a deal, so you were both happy with the deal that you came to. Can you speak to proportions or ratios and your obligations after exit?
Yes, the deal was structured in such a way that I actually ended up with something like 95, 98% on December the 31st as all cash up front. I was contracted to do 4 days a week for the next 12 months. And then there was to be any balance paid. I think it was after the first quarter or the second quarter, depending on the performance. But it was a small percentage. So basically, I worked the following year based on a salary. So I was lucky in as much as I found a purchaser who was prepared to pay. And not be based on performance and not be based on 50% now on different terms. That was the deal I wanted. That was the deal I said I would accept. And that was the deal we did.
And could you speak to, and again, we'll edit out if not, if not the monetary amount, what multiple of the profit was the valuation at?
I think as a multiple, it was probably something like 5 times. 5 times net.
Yeah, wonderful. Tremendous. Yeah, so 5 times net, and that might be 4 times EBIT or whatever, but still,
Yeah.
right? Which, by the way, sometimes people hear things. I heard one the other day that claimed was 4 times revenue, and it's not, well, they're just not true when you hear headlines like that. Whereas I would say it depends on the sector, of course, but those listening to this, it does vary quite a lot. But the vast majority of SMEs, especially when they're small, not medium, single digit millions of revenue, it's 3 to 5 is the range, the multiple that you are likely to get. Now, again, I've got a client at the moment, Alastair, who we've got an offer and it's probably about 4x, but it will be a lot more because there's a lot of excess cash in the business. So the balance sheet will get added on top of the 4x, and that's actually an 8-figure revenue business. So that's a bit bigger.
Yeah, I think that was the one disagreement my solicitor and my accountant, who by then was the son of my original accountant, they came up with. Look, you're leaving cash in the business. You don't have to leave cash in the business. And I said, no, I'd like to leave cash in the business because I'm happy with the capital sum I've got, and the business does need cash to keep on getting.
So what was the process like emotionally? Well, I'll ask 2 questions and you can kind of connect them up or whatever order makes sense. So I'll be curious, what was the exit process like? Was there any fear around letting go? And kind of a related question would be, what was the hardest or most surprising thing about life after exit?
Okay, so having made the decision and having had very good family reasons to want to do it, I was very pleased to do it. So I was delighted to do it. Then you kind of sit down and reflect about it. And you think that's my sort of, not my life, but it's sort of my baby. I came up with the idea. I started, I ran it. I'm very emotionally involved with it. So it's a tough one to let go. But the overriding factor was I was pleased to have done it. The difficulty was then working the next 12 months. And I know so many people who have worked their 12 months and they've left after a while. I could see fairly early on in those. Well, let me say one thing. I firmly believe that anybody who purchases a small business where an SME starts and stops, people can make up their own mind. Where they purchase a business needs to come in, look at it for 6 months, maybe get away with 3, but certainly 3 to 6 months, look at it and make no fundamental changes. Because you've bought it because it's been running along nicely. So keep it running along nicely, see what happens. And if you leave it running for 3 to 6 months, then you've got the backing of all the team, you've got the backing of the previous owner, and you can then make your decisions based on where you want to take that business. It's yours, so you've bought it, you can do what you like with it. But I firmly believe that should happen. As the year went on, it got harder, basically, because naturally changes are going to be made, and it just got a little bit harder. And I think after maybe 7 or 8 months, I did offer to leave so that there's a free hand, because the worst thing is for a new business owner to come in, say to the team, look, this is all going fine, but I want to make this little change. And that little change gets a bit bigger. And somebody comes to the previous owner and say, why are they doing this? And whatever's happening, and it's probably for a very justified reason, that previous owner has to stay focused on what the buyer is doing.
Right.
And you may not agree with it. So it's a difficult one. You have to support the buyer. That's where your loyalty lies at that stage. And so I did, but it was difficult.
The true story, Alistair, literally, the phone call I had before we recorded this interview was from somebody that I'd helped exit a couple of months ago, 2.5 months ago. And he is in a 6-month transitional period. And then it drops down. He's actually got 12 months of transition, but he's full-time, for 6 months. And that was agreed and negotiated and etc. And he's very happy. Again, got the majority of the cash up front and he's getting paid a fair market salary for this kind of advisory position. And he literally said to me on this call, he went, look, there's 2 decisions that the new owners made, and one involved my clients said, this person needs to get fired. They misbehaved. It's gross misconduct. They need to go. And the senior management team were like, yeah, the person needs to go. And the client was smart enough to say, well, hold on a second. Because there's potential liabilities because the person had done a poor job and there's potential liabilities to the company. It's like, it's not our business. And the person's also in a protected characteristic. Well, HR advisor said, but we need to take our opinion up to the owner. It's not our business. And I give him credit because he was making his opinion known because they wanted him to stay on because he's got the experience. Because in his case, it was private equity purchases. so they don't run the business and they're not operators. But he's like, well, they're the ones that need to make the assessment of risk about this judgment or not. So yeah, I mean, it's a common story. This, how do we deal with it post exit? And well, it sounds like you navigated what is a tricky situation well. So looking back though, Alastair, what do you wish you'd known sooner?
I wish I'd known about starting my own business about 20 years ago. I mean, I didn't start GarageFlex or Garage Tech until 2005, by which time I was 58, something like that. And in fact, I've said to my family, my son, he started his business when he was 31. That's a great time to start. So definitely start earlier. I wouldn't have necessarily signed up with an American organization, so I would have started up absolutely on my own. And I say this to anybody, you know, I can remember going to franchise exhibitions when I was selling something and I was on a stand and people come and say, I'm really down, I've just been made redundant. Great, terrific. You can do what you really want to do now, so get on and do it. And that's the advice I give to anybody. Just take a chance, get on, do it, and believe that you can do it and you will do it. And the other thing, take advice. It's a lonely old business being an entrepreneur on your own. I was lucky that I found the gentleman who coached me before you, and then I was lucky I found you. But never be afraid to take advice. Stock-wise, I made some mistakes buying some stock. That's a learning exercise.
What would you say for someone who's listening in the trenches, they've got businesses established, but they're not sure whether it's sellable or they're reflecting on exit? Any musings there about how to weigh up the timing for exit?
Well, definitely take advice. Take the best advice you can. And if you have to pay for it, then definitely pay for it. Also have a plan for after exit. I think it's really important because a very good friend of mine, he sold his business the same time as I did, and he had no interests in life. He's worked all his life. So he's struggling a little bit to find things to do. He and I have been on cycling holidays now, and we're finding things for him to do. But make sure you've got something to do after exit. Once you've sold, then accept that you've sold, somebody else has got your business or that business, and they're going to be running it. So you can advise, you can tell them what you think, but bite your tongue if things are not working out quite right.
Just an amusing story, Alistair. I'm a big, as you know, Warren Buffett fanboy, and he bought a business, a furniture mart business run by a lady called Rose Blumkin, who was a Russian immigrant. And he bought it from her, I think she was in her 80s in the time, but she stayed on in the business, but she took the money off the table so her family was secure, but stayed operating in the business. Well, she subsequently fell out, not with Warren, because he wasn't managing it, but one of her children who was running the business. And in her 90s, she said, screw you, left, and opened up, leased a building opposite, and opened a direct competitor. 2 years later, Warren Buffett bought her out. So she was into, I think, her late 90s. I think she was 98 when he bought out the competitor on the condition that she'd come back, carry on working, and he put in a non-compete, because of course the non-compete had expired when she set up in competition, and he put in a non-compete that was, well, if she left the business at any time, she couldn't compete for 5 years, knowing full well that she was in her late 90s, but she lived to 103 or 104. And he said, good a business person. He goes, I needed 5 years beyond the end, because he goes, I don't want to be in competition against us. Yeah. That story always makes me chuckle. So finally, Alistair, if anybody wants to connect, if they've resonated with your story, what's the best way that they can track you down? Or can they not at all?
They can. If I'm not playing golf, I'm playing croquet. If I'm not playing croquet, I'm cycling. If I'm not cycling, I'm on my allotment. No, of course they can track me down by email, or certainly a lot of your old clients have got my phone number. But my email is alastair@thebrooms.net.
Brooms.net?
Yeah, which is ALASTAIR @thebrooms.net. And very happy. I keep an eye on what's going on with one or two of the old colleagues, and I'd love to hear from anybody. But yeah, if they want to know what life's like after exit, get in touch.
Fantastic. Alistair, it's been a pleasure. Great to catch up. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure, Dan. All the best to you, and thanks for your time too.